Welcome to Delta River Stage. It's River Emajõgi behind me, and this bridge is called Freedom Bridge. Now we have our talk goes to Singapore. Um, it's a Singapore story, and we're talking about whether and to what extent innovation can be managed top-down, or it cannot. Um, the title of the talk, as I said, is this, and I have a great pleasure to invite here my good friend, Colonel Chopra, to our virtual stage. Chopra is the board chairman and independent director at SJX Singapore. He's also an investor and co-founder in different companies. He's a former director of administration at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. And he's a former colonel in Singapore Navy. So the floor is yours, Chopra. Welcome to Estonia.
Thank you, Ott. Good morning, everyone. Ott, thank you for the very kind introduction. I am a chairman of a board and independent director of a company listed on the SGX, just to clarify that point. So once again, thank you. My talk is basically to share my experiences with regards to innovation. I've spent many years in the Singapore Armed Forces, in particular the Singapore Navy. At the highlight of my career, I commanded a group of ships. Why did we build those ships? We needed a platform that could serve the lift capability of the Army and the Air Force. We also needed a platform to support the strike capability when we are pursuing a strike mission. We also needed a platform that could be involved in disaster relief. We needed a multi-purpose ship platform large enough to be able to do all that. We needed a few. We did not have. We also had other constraints. We had to do so with half the manpower of similar ships in the world, with considerably reduced maintenance cost, and a very tight schedule, and more considerations. The reason why I give this example is we actually built those ships, and it required a lot of innovation. It was designed and built in Singapore. And when we exercised with our friends abroad, when we had visitors on the platform, when we showed and performed with capability, the wow was there and still is. The point I'm trying to make here is the drive for this particular platform came because of a need for the defense of our nation. So the drive was indeed a strategic drive. However, the execution was a combination of a strategic issue with operational leaders, managers, right down to at the equipment operator level. The top-down and bottom-up approach, in this particular instance, it was all one. We could not have built this platform if only the top wanted it. We had to build this platform with the inputs from operational people on the ground. And obviously, we learned from the many success stories all over the world. Like any innovation, this platform also has its life cycle. Every innovation has got its life cycle. After a certain time, new technologies will come up, new ways of doing things will come up, and then a new innovation will take its place. So that's one story of the Singapore Armed Forces. The issue of top-down, bottom-up was not quite relevant because it had to be done together. If you look at the whole of government approach. If you look at the biggest challenges we are facing today as an island state, global warming is a big issue. We are an island state. Sea levels are rising. Will we get into a serious problem? Yes, the potential is yes, which is why we are investing more than $100 billion to try and look into this issue. The point here is, in order to do so, there are many ways innovatively to look at this. But this island state has developed a platform where every inch of this country, every inch has been digitized. It has been digitized at a level of 3D, where we can simulate what will happen when the sea level rises. What will happen if we raise certain roads? What will happen to our entire drainage system? So we have done lots of scenario playing, looking at urban planning issues, looking at how to make sure the country over the next 50, 100 years is able to manage global warming when the impact truly arrives. This is a very, very innovative platform. It bore out of a challenge. Just like the Navy's ships, this particular issue also bore out of a challenge. And it is a challenge large enough for the entire organization to get behind it. If you look at Singapore's commercial side of it, we are pretty strong in the R&D side of it. That is because we have developed a very strong platform that supports the ecosystem. As our previous speaker had mentioned, we have lots of grants and a culture to allow for these companies to tap on. Certainly, we also have a whole of government crowdfunding approach. So again, when you look at crowdfunding, one can say it's bottom up. When you look at grants, when you look at government support, one can say it's top down. Having experienced both the commercial world and the government, I am quite convinced that one cannot do without the other. And both allow for this innovation to take place. Now, the biggest killer of any innovation idea is when you have processes or people or a bureaucracy that stifles it, that is so risk averse that you have to de-risk the project to the point where there is no risk. And if there is no risk, it's very difficult to innovate. So, which is why we always try to separate and have organizations in place in companies and at the various ministries to drive innovation. Because we do realize that on a day-to-day scale, day-to-day work, you will have to manage risk very differently from when you are doing specific innovative work to either solve a current problem or to maximize the possibilities and looking into the future to see what else we can do. So to ensure that there is an ecosystem that allows for risk taking, that allows for the gumption, one has to have a certain mindset. And so we are quite aware that this mindset doesn't come naturally. The average person doesn't have that mindset to take a risk and to take the plunge to do what it takes, and at the same time mitigate it as you move along and to accept that things can fail. So with this regard, companies, organizations will always set up a different organization so that they have different types of processes to build that culture that allows for people to safely, in an encouraging manner, carry out with their innovation work, be it including the resource availability, skill availability, talent availability. So having said that, I have just very briefly touched on how generally, I'm sure in many other countries, it's the same process. Um, what we do appreciate here in our psyche is that the status quo is usually not status quo is usually okay for the time being, but in the longer run, status quo is usually not okay. In other words, there has to be a team of people, top down and bottom up, always asking ourselves, is this status quo good enough, short, medium to long term? And that's when innovation takes place in that context. My concluding remark is that no one has ownership of ideas. It can come from top, it can come from the side, it can come from anywhere. But for it to be implemented, it requires a process that allows for good ideas to be maximized. And for that, you require a complete ecosystem, and that is always work in progress. I think I'll stop for now and take questions.
Thank you, Chopra. Thank you for these thoughts about innovation in Singapore and the Navy. You have been the administrative director of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and Singapore is quite well known of its professional civil servants. How important is education in this picture? Can you educate leaders, or is it something you need to be born?
Oh, good question. So at the heart of Singapore's success is able leadership and able managers. Also, if you were to pick between these two and also able managers and able operators, you just cannot totally depend on the leadership. You will have to have both. But your question to me is directed more towards the top, the leadership of the civil service. And that's a completely separate discussion. It can take days to discuss that. We have our unique way of finding the top talent in Singapore to make sure that we create all kinds of schemes, all kinds of avenues for talent, for ideas to take fruition. So you are absolutely right. It's not in our scheme of trying to identify the future leaders and future managers that drive a lot of our policies. You're absolutely right. It is not done. It's not left to chance. We have got a very robust system behind it to make sure that the best in our small country can go up to the top and serve the country in that regard.
Okay, this is the story of Singapore, but Chopra, what's today happening in Singapore? I haven't been for a year now in there. How you have responded to the crisis? What's the vision of Singapore today? Is it still the same it was before? How is life going?
Look, as I gave two examples of challenge, when this thing came up, one of the top challenges given by the government is we should also develop a vaccine. I'm happy to share with you that with Duke NUS, the Singapore's R&D research community have developed our own vaccine, ARCT21, if I remember correctly. And it is now in clinical phase 2 trials. So you can see that whilst there are sufficient vaccines out there, we are developing our own. And it's using RMNA technology. We are developing our own. If you look at the way we have kind of managed our work in Singapore, we are very blessed with sufficient resources that allows a lot of our companies to continue to operate. But the schemes that have been put in place, they are not broad brush. They are tailored for every potential type of industry. And it's again, work in progress. You will not find that kind of an anguish here that things have collapsed. No, actually things, if you ask me, things are going pretty much normal. However, we are on heightened state of awareness that, look, we have to do things differently, be extremely careful. But the way the schemes have been put across to all of us, and the adoption rate, the simplicity of us to adopt these schemes, it has been very, very smooth. Granted, communications can be better. Granted, certain ministries have made U-turns in their communications. Granted, it is not perfect. But look, it's a difficult job. It's a difficult time. Anyone who expects it to be absolutely perfect with no mistakes, I think, is living in a false world.
Okay, but more broadly in Southeast Asia, how things are going? How are your neighbors, the economics locally, how businesses are doing?
Look, it's slowed down, right? It's slowed down. I don't have the data of the economic activity in Asia per se, but from what I read, obviously everything has slowed down. But in Singapore's context, it's not too bad. It's slowed down, it's picked up. We've had to apply some brakes. But things are not that bad within Singapore. What in the region, yes, obviously things have slowed down a lot. Many companies have suffered. Unemployment has has increased. Many families have lost their ability to maintain their lifestyles, so to speak. So it's a very tough time. Please don't get me wrong that I'm undermining. It's an extremely tough time. But the governments in this part of the world, they are acting very, very responsibly, and they are doing their best. You don't find situations where there are riots breaking out or there is extreme, despair. But I would say generally, yes, things are not good, but they are being managed as best as possible.
Okay, thank you, Chopra, by now. We will meet Chopra later on as well. So stay tuned. Chopra, please. But before we go to the Delta main stage now, I'm reminding you that you at the Delta Trends Day 2021, we're talking about how to renew the 400 years old university. And we have covered actually four different topics. We're talking about the nature and role of innovative communities in history and in the future. We are talking about talents of the future, how to attract, motivate, and lead them. Who are the talents of the future? We're talking about innovation in education and its management. And finally, we're talking about talent health and preventive healthcare. So these are the topics we are covering today. We are just in the beginning, and I'm happy to give the floor now to the Delta main stage. So please, Kadri.